Here we go. Thank you so much. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're holding this webinar today in Brisbane. They're the Turrbal and the Jagera people. Wish to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders continue to play in our society. As this webinar is being viewed by people across Queensland and Australia, I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land throughout the country and extend a warm welcome to any First Nations Australians listening today. Today we're joined by Michael Murray in Townsville Community Law, who will be talking to us about using class as a practice management tool. For the past 12 months, Townsville Community Law has piloted a paperless office program using class as a practice management tool. The program has expanded to include all of their specialised funded services and all service types, including information, referral, legal advice, legal task, other representation, court tribunal, etc. In this webinar, Michael, who's a solicitor from Townsville Community Law, is going to give us a background of the program and some significant milestones achieved to date, and give us some practical demonstrations and examples to help us in obtaining a greater understanding of the capabilities of class and how it could be used as a complete practice management tool. I'll hand over to Michael to tell you a little bit more about himself when I hand over. Just let you know that today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll have the recording available to download later today or tomorrow, and we'll circulate that. The PowerPoints and other materials have been emailed out to everyone who registered. They're also available to download from our website and from the handouts section of the GoToWebinar control panel. There's two ways you can ask questions. You can press the button that looks like a hand, and we'll see the hand go up at our end. We can unmute you so you can ask your questions, or you can type the question into the question box on the control panel and we will read your question out. That's probably easier for everybody. We'll hold questions till the end of the presentation, but please feel free to type them in as you think of them. We'll also be running some polls today, so please make sure you put your answers in when they appear on the screen. I'll hand over to Michael now and talk to you again at the end of the session. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Sam. As Sam said, my name is Michael. I'm a lawyer at Townsville Community Law, working primarily in the human rights, social security and coronial legal services here. And as Sam said, for the past about 1.5 or 2 years, I've spearheaded a project at our service aimed at using class as a complete practice management tool for all of our client and non-client services, with the aim to transform our office into what is referred to as a paper-light office. So today I'm just going to give you a bit of a background of that project. It's really just an introduction. I'm hoping to give you some ideas about how you could use class a little bit differently for your service if you were interested in doing something similar. Just before I start getting into things, I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today in Townsville, that is the Wulgurukaba and Bindal people. But like Sam, I would like to extend my acknowledgement to the traditional owners across Queensland and the country and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Here's what I hope to achieve with you all today. First, just to get a perspective on how everyone feels about class. And I know that there are some very strong opinions out there. Sam and Carly have assisted me just to set up a few polls that we're going to run through first to get everyone's thoughts on class, just so I can see what the feeling is there among our audience today. After that, I'm going to give a bit of background on our Paperlight project, including how it started and a bit of a timeline we followed to get it up and running, and finish that section with some significant milestones we've achieved to date and a few things that we're looking forward to doing in the future. And after that, I'm going to look at the utility of class and some of the tools available to us. And probably the section that will benefit most people is I'll be running through some videos with some practical client examples, fake clients, of course, that will look at how we're currently using class for a few different service types and how we're using it as a practice management tool and how we're using it to run a Paperlight office. And at the end, I will do a concluding poll just to see if anyone's perception of class has changed throughout the presentation. Now, my details are on the final slide. including my contact details. I appreciate that we don't have a huge amount of time today. So if anyone would like to contact me after the webinar, send me an email, give me a call, whatever, that's perfectly fine. I'm more than happy to have a chat to anyone one-on-one as well. And just a few caveats before I start too. I don't have any specific IT qualifications, so the presentation isn't particularly technical, which I think is good in a way, because often this space can get extremely muddled with the tech side of things, which can be confusing. Much of what I talk about today is aimed to inspire you or to give you some ideas about how you can use class at your centre. It isn't a one system fits all, and the processes that I've designed with this system, they have been designed with our workplace structure in mind. So please, everyone, just remember that it might not be a fit for your centre, but hopefully it could give you some ideas. Unfortunately, we won't have any time to discuss data definitions in detail, as much as I know everyone loves doing that. And we also won't have time to dive into any of the complex technical functions of class. Some of them might become apparent that we're using some of those functions as we progress through the webinar today. But I'm more than happy to talk to people individually about how we do that, or refer them to some resources that will assist them. All right, so before we start, I'd like to get everyone's honest thoughts on class. I don't have any stake in class other than working at a legal service, so feel free to be brutally honest. I know it invokes a lot of strong reactions amongst people, but it is important for me to get a sense of how everyone's using it before we move through the presentation. So, Sam, do you want me to run through the slides with the polls, or how does it work?
Well, if you'd just like to continue through, as the slide comes up, we can launch the poll for you, and then people can answer and we can share what the results were if you'd like.
Fantastic. So you'll see our first poll there. I just wanted everyone's thoughts on how they currently rate class as a practice management tool. Very good, good, not bad, bad, or the absolute worst.
We've got about 10 seconds left to answer if you haven't already.
All right, that's good. That's actually a bit surprising. I didn't think there would be so many. So took the 25% that said it was good. I expected there to be some bad reactions, but it is good that no one has settled, or only 1% have settled on that absolute worst answer at the end there. But that's good. And we'll just go to the second one. So, who's currently using class as a practice management tool?
I'm just closing it up in about 5 seconds if you haven't answered already.
Okay, that's good. That's a bit surprising too. It's good that there's a decent proportion of people who are actively trying to use class to manage their services electronically and things like that. And to the 60 or so percent that said no, hopefully today will give you some ideas so you can do that in the future. Now, this is a question about your staff. So if you're a staff member, or even if you're a director or a principal lawyer, I just want to know who has access to most of the services and utilities of class. I know that a lot of centres restrict staff members, so they might only be able to conflict check. They can't create services and things like that.
About 5 seconds left, guys.
Okay, that's good. We can move on to the next one. Seems like a large proportion do have access, which is great. And now there's 2 polls on this one. I'm just wondering, this is mainly about people's knowledge of class. So did you know class can draft, record file notes, store client documents, set reminders, limitation periods, court attendances, or general bring-ups for services? So we've just got three answers there, yes, no, or partly.
If you've got any answers to this one, or if there's anything that you'd like to say, you can type it in the questions section. It might be a bit easier than doing this one as a poll. So if you've got any comments, you're welcome to pop them in.
So yeah, maybe if people could just tell me in the question section if they use class to do any of those things, yes, or if they're not using it to do that.
There's lots of people saying yes and a few people saying partly by the looks of it.
Yep.
A couple of people who don't really know about these functions but don't really use them. And
yep.
But know that it can do those things.
Yeah, it looks like there's a pretty even mix across yes, no, and partly, which is good. And for those who aren't using it or didn't know that you could do it, I think you'll get some real benefit out of this presentation. We can probably skip the last poll. Did you know class could do all of that? Because I think we've sort of answered that in the previous poll. So we can move on from the polls. Thank you everyone for participating in that. For those who've indicated some difficulties with class or some resistance or hesitance towards using class in this way, I do really hope that as we progress through this presentation, I can change your mind or give you some ideas moving forward. So just by way of a background about Townsville Community Law, we are located in beautiful North Queensland. And although it's particularly chilly, and when I say chilly, I mean about 17 or 18 degrees presently, which isn't chilly for most people, famous for our sun beaches and ruining federal elections. We have 10 employed staff across 10 funded services, as well as generally anywhere between 20 or 40 volunteer lawyers and volunteer law students at any one time. We've had a paper-based office for over 25 years, so as long as we have existed until 2019. And just to give you an idea of how much paper that can be, we generally offer about 50 appointments a week, depending on what clinics are running at what time of the year, plus any ongoing work such as representation being done by staff. So we have at last count, and I just did a quick count yesterday or the day before, sorry, we're about 360 archive boxes floating around with files in them that can't be destroyed, as well as plenty of off-site storage, which also stores some files and things like that as well. So obviously, the point I'm getting across is that we were incredibly dependent on paper. And apart from saving things to a folder on our computer, like a letter if we might be drafting that, we'd still print it out, sign it and send it. We really weren't using any sort of electronic practice management. So we would be maintaining those physical files as they were known, pinning correspondence on the correspondence bundle, the court bundle, those sorts of things, okay? And we had no experience as a collective centre of using an electronic practice management system either. A few of us who had come from other jobs to the sector had some experience, but realistically we had a fairly limited knowledge. So in terms of how the project came about, I was talking about our huge amount of archive boxes, and every few months we're required to undertake what we call a file cull. So reviewing those services older than 7 years and ensuring they can be destroyed to free up more space in the archive room. Now, we didn't draw straws to do it, but if we did, I must have been terrible at it because I was doing it. I did it for, I think, about 6 months in a row. And then Aaron, our director, and I got to thinking, well, there really has to be a better way to manage all of these files, or as they're now known, services. So our first thought was that we were sick of paper. We were sick of the cost. We were in a small office, so we were well and truly sick of storage limitations as well. We knew a little bit about class, but really quite a low level expertise with class. So we set up a project to work towards becoming a paper-light office and using only class, primarily because it was a system that was already being provided to us. So we didn't have to pay a third-party provider, which can be particularly expensive. I'm sure some people have looked into it, but especially when you need to pay for a license for each worker that needs access to it, the cost really does add up. So that's what we wanted to achieve with our project. We wanted to achieve a paper-light office, which is different to paperless. We thought entirely removing paper from day one wasn't feasible. So what we thought we'd do is we'd combine tech with our existing practices to try and remove most paper from the process, okay? We wanted to maintain or increase staff productivity. Obviously increasing is the dream, but we certainly didn't want staff productivity to fall as a result of implementing a new system. We wanted to increase flexibility of staff, which is increasingly important. We didn't know this back then, but obviously now with many people working from home and things like that, we wanted to increase the flexibility of staff to do that if they need to. We wanted to support and train our staff to ensure that they are comfortable with the transition to a paper-light or an electronic system. It really is a huge cultural shift, so it's very important to us to make sure our staff members felt comfortable with that. We wanted to invest in suitable technology to run a paper-light office, so things like portable tech, your iPads, your laptops, if you need to be taking them home or going to court or going to meetings and things like that, but also things in the office like second screens to make it easier just to work off electronic documents only. You can review documents on one screen while you're typing a letter on the other screen. Obviously, we wanted to save cash on paper, and I think investing in technology is a one-off. Well, it's not a one-off. It is continuing, but it's an expense. You really have to weigh that against how much money you're saving with paper as well. We wanted to ensure we were still complying with the relevant risk management guides and strategies that are out there and that we're required to comply with. We wanted to make a common sense and easy approach to document management. So I spoke earlier that sometimes the complexities with the technology can really get in the way of the discussion. And we really wanted a plain language and easy approach to managing our services. And we wanted to continue to provide excellent services to our clients and the community. So we didn't want the shift to this system to impact on our client service or our service to the community. So I'm just going to run through, I think it's 4 or 5 phases of which we sort of progressed through this, this transition. Our first phase was the learning and testing phase, I call it. Sorry, I couldn't figure out a more interesting name for it. As I said, I had a very basic knowledge of class. And when I say basic, I mean I could conflict search and I could find a client by their name or their number, so I could go into the archive room and pull out the paper file. But really my knowledge at the time was not much more beyond that. So what we did in this stage, we enabled, our administrator gave me the highest possible permissions in class. And I did spend a huge amount of time on class just playing around with things, learning about its capabilities, what it could or what it couldn't do, testing what it could do with our existing practices to see how that fits or what we would need to change or how we would need to change class. And speaking to people as well, so constantly bothering help desk or other legal centres. There's probably some people on the line who have certainly gotten calls from me, who I know were trying to implement something similar just to bounce ideas off one another. And once we had sort of gathered all of that knowledge and worked out, had a rough idea in our head of what we wanted to do, I went about creating a guide which we've called the Electronic Document Management Guide, which probably isn't the most apt name for it nowadays. I think it's really progressed beyond that. And originally it was just focused on storing documents in class, but obviously it's evolved from that as well. Now, we hoped that guide would cover all aspects of our current work and incorporate our current work into class entirely without the use of paper documents. It covers most things, so things like our client intake forms, recording our service types, recording notes within those service types and things like that, uploading client documents, principal, solicitor or responsible person service checking and service reviews, things like recording conflicts of interest and things like that, and incorporating non-casework projects into that as well, or community projects. So we did try and make it easy to read using plain and simple language, and we also released it to feedback to staff regularly, and we still get feedback on it. So there's been 7 versions to date. You'll see on the screen that's version 7. We're currently working on a version 8 that we're hoping is going to cut the guide in half and make things a lot easier. But there's just a few bits and pieces I need to work out before that. I have circulated that to CLCQ, and I think that they've either emailed it around or put it on the website. So feel free to have a look at that. Just keep that caveat in mind that obviously that guide has been designed around how we work at Townsville Community Law and our systems. So it might not translate easily to your practice, but like I said, I'm hoping it will give you some ideas moving forward. So stage 3 was staff training. I've put intensive in red sort of as a joke, but not really. Undertaking a project like this really does take a huge cultural shift. You're talking about lawyers who might have only used a paper-based system, or not just lawyers, social workers, support workers, administrative staff who have only used a paper-based system for 5, 10, 20, 25, 30 years, okay? So we really wanted to make sure staff were capable of making the transition by providing them with the relevant training, and also comfortable with class and the technology that they were going to be using. So we undertook several rounds of training, including, I've got up there, class training, so getting people more familiar with class and its capabilities, the guide training about how we're going to manage things at Townsville Community Law, general IT training, and with that I just mean simple things such as, you know, working on 2 screens or working off an iPad or a laptop. And even more simple things such as optimizing scanning over copying, getting out of the habit of copying, same with emailing over posting, getting the best use out of Microsoft Word, Excel or PDFs, and training on specific devices, as I mentioned. We also provided some training and information in relation to working in a paper-light office. So things you might overlook, such as positioning your office to make a client feel comfortable, even though you might be typing in an appointment or in front of a computer during your appointment. The initial feedback we got from staff was that it's going to really distract clients if we're doing that. My personal view was every time I've been to the doctor in the past 10, 15 or 20 years, the doctor has always been sitting in front of a computer typing notes into my file. So it doesn't really bother me, but I certainly understand that some clients may feel uncomfortable with it. So just simple things like positioning your office so you're still able to maintain that connection with a client, even though that you're typing. And phase 4 there. So after we created the guide, we've done some training. We gradually implemented the processes across the office. Now I'll emphasise that it was gradual. We transitioned each staff member one by one individually. So we used a one-on-one shadow model So obviously I sort of transitioned first to the electronic document management, and then another staff member, we moved him over to it, and basically I would shadow him and review sort of all of his services after they were complete, beforehand and after, just to make sure that the person was comfortable with the system and that everything was being done correctly to ensure consistency across the board. In terms of the implementation, we didn't take people's paper files off them. It wasn't a matter of walking into an office and pointing at a stack of files and saying, these need to be put on Class. We're only using Class now. We acknowledge that it's difficult to do that, particularly if you've had a service or a file for a long period of time. So we said, if you've got a paper file, you finish that file paper, and then if any new services are open, then that goes on to Class. So we only did it for new services, and we gradually phased out our existing paper files as we moved through. In the final stage is really, it's an ongoing stage, continued training and regular evaluation. So we're regularly monitoring services and the quality of that, monitoring the effectiveness, staff productivity and compliance with the systems. We're regularly providing continued training by way of staff meetings, or as we're doing it now, Microsoft Teams, on specific issues we might be identifying, or just general reminders, or specific training to improve areas. And we're also very receptive to evaluation from staff, and even some of our sort of best developments with this process have come from other staff members who've sort of noticed something the way they're working, and they say, oh, hey, could we do this instead, because it's going to cut my time in half doing it. So we're very receptive to feedback and encourage it. And I'll just finish this section with just a few milestones that we've, so you can see by way of a timeline what we've been doing. So I think it was about February 2019, I started using the system for all new legal advice only. So task and rep work was still being done in paper, but by March, it was all being done online by Class, all of our task and rep work. Also in March, we began transitioning staff members individually using that one-on-one shadow model that we discussed. So by about June or July 2019, all staff had been transitioned for all new service types except community projects. So some of them might have still had the odd paper file sitting around, but for all new services coming in, they were being done electronically by Class. In July, we moved our community projects over. By September, I mentioned there were still paper files floating around. By September, we had phased out the paper files, so there were no more active paper files in the office. Everything was online. Now, I've got court compatibility in there, just to give you an example of how this works. So we sort of immediately, when we began transitioning people across, started doing most of our smaller court or tribunal work electronically. So your half-day or one-day hearings were paperless. By November, we'd moved all court hearings across to the paperless or paper-light system. And just to give you an example of mine, in November, we were involved in an inquest into a death in care, which ran for 2 weeks. Now, at the inquest, we used a laptop and an iPad for the entire 2-week duration easily. We were able to access Class in court by VPN. We had internet, we had our brief, all of our client documents, and everything was all on those devices. And to give you some context on how much paper that saved, counsel to the left of me for the duration of the inquest had about 3 suitcases to herself. She also had 2 instructing lawyers who had about 3 suitcases each as well. And I'm sure they had a lot more paper back at the office as well. But it was incredibly easy throughout that hearing to pull up documents. I didn't need to rummage through a brief or a suitcase or something like that. Everything was at our fingertips, and it was very, very effective for that specific incident, and has been for other court matters since then. And then COVID, I've got that as a milestone. Not many of us would consider it a milestone, I know, but I only want to mention there that when centres were forced to close during the shutdown, I know that there was a lot of uncertainty about how people were going to work at home and how they were going to manage confidentiality, or how they were going to change their systems in such a short period of time. Now, fortunately, because we had already set up to work electronically, we were literally able just to pick up our tech. So I took my laptop and my iPad home, and then was talking to clients the next day from home, and able to do all of that work, access class, all of that from home straight away with no issues using our existing processes, which was extremely helpful for us. And that's just two things. I'm sure I've missed a couple of things here, but that's just two things that we're still looking to do in the future. So we haven't transitioned our volunteer services entirely across. So our volunteer legal clinics operated by volunteer lawyers still run as a paper clinic, and our university clinic with James Cook University still runs as a paper clinic, but that starts up again in 2 or 3 weeks' time, and my intention is to have it run as an electronic clinic for the first time. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so let's take a look at Class as a practice management software or practice management tool. So I'm sure everyone knows what practice management software is. It's exactly what it says it is. It's a software that manages all and most aspects of your work, and the work that we do is legal work and community work. And I thought it would be controversial in suggesting that Class is well equipped to manage most aspects of our work as community lawyers, but as we saw from the polls earlier, that might not be the most controversial opinion out there, which is fantastic. Prior to coming to the sector, I had used other practice management software in private practice, such as Leap or OpenOffice. And while there is benefits to that for-profit software, my experience and the experience of a couple of staff members here who have used other software was that realistically, when we got used to the new normal and we got used to Class, we were really glad that we hadn't bothered to invest in a for-profit practice management tool, because we found that Class really handled most aspects of what we needed to do. So what can Class do? We asked this in the polls, and most of you seem to already be aware of it, which is great. You can host forms and precedents on Class, including blank forms your staff members might need to download for every new appointment, like a client intake form, or precedent letters, court documents, and things like that. They can be hosted by the message board, or they can be hosted in other places as well on Class, which is very handy. You can communicate messages to staff by the message board. So instead of the old pin board in our kitchen, we have transitioned to putting sort of those key messages that we would normally put on Class on the message board, and I'll run through an example of what that looks like as well. It can record file notes. It can pretty much record any sort of note you want to take on a service, intake notes, closing notes, or just your stock standard file note. It can record limitation periods. So as you know, the risk management guide provides that a limitation period must be clearly marked on a service. I'll show you in a minute, but you'll specifically see how we record that on each service, so we comply with that. You can record court dates, existing court dates and notes which you might have typed when you've been at court, or you can record future court dates or any other important dates, and you can save them to Class and your Outlook calendar, so that you get a reminder on that day when something's happening. And that's the same as bring ups. You can record a service or a file bring up and save them to Class and your Outlook calendar. So you're not, it's easy when you had a paper system, because I used to lay out all of my files on all of the files that had outstanding work on them on the floor, because that's how I was taught to do it at the firm I worked at. And then I would slowly go through them and pick one up on my desk and do one at a time as I worked through the outstanding work. And there is a real risk of one of the main fears people have with this system is if they're recording everything electronically, you don't have that physical reminder anymore. But Class is more than well equipped to record bring-ups and things like that. And of course, it can save documents to a service, or it can save documents to a client file as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through a couple of practical examples, which I think will be the most beneficial thing for people to see how we're using Class. I was hoping to share my screen while I was using Class in real time, but I decided that it just wasn't possible, as one wrong click of the button could bring up our client database or some confidential material. And I know that our director Aaron is listening, so I was certainly getting a lot of trouble for that. I have recorded instead some videos for you of my desktop, which I did last week. And what we're going to do is we're going to work through a client example step by step and just talk about what I'm doing in them to give you some ideas about Class. Today, we're only going to look at an initial legal advice for a new client and a subsequent representation service for that same client at a later stage, okay? But you'll see as we work through the information that I've given you can really apply to any service type. So our client here is Mr. John Doe, not a hugely creative name, I know. John has been fined for a breach of social distancing laws, COVID-19 fine, which is something I'm sure a lot of services seeing coming through. Now, unfortunately, that's not John in the picture. If he had been brilliant enough to strap a pill noodle to his head, like the cafe in Germany that did that, he might not have been fined. But the situation we're in is John's received a fine from the police, and I've tried not to make it overly complex. He's booked in to see you by phone because most of our clients are by phone now. He's a new client, so he hasn't been to the service before. So the only information you really have at this stage is what's in your Outlook calendar about John and his legal matter. Okay, so let's see how we use Class to record this advice interaction. So I'll just see if I can get the video working. Just interrupt me, Sam, if that stops working at any stage. I think it is playing now. Yep. So you'll see I have opened to the message board on Class, and you'll see on the left-hand side, that's from the developers, which they provide information I'm sure everyone reads diligently as it is posted. And there might just be a bit of a lag between what I'm saying and what the video is saying, just because I had to record it. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that's the message board. Okay, so that's where we generally store common client documents or templates. You can see that we've got our intake form stored on there. So if we click on that, it brings up our intake form that we need to fill out for a new client appointment. And we also do things like send messages to staff or pin messages. So you can see there's a couple there on COVID developments, contract tracing and returning to the office and things like that. But we're going to head over to, once my recording catches up, we're going to head over to the Triage tab in a moment, which I had already opened up. Now, the Triage we use as a parking lot of sorts, so it's where we put things before they come to service. So if a client calls and they're booked in, they go in Triage. If they call anyhow, they go in Triage before we figure out what to do with it, whether it's information referral or book it in. And I've done a specific search for John Doe here so that we don't see any other matters in our Triage, but generally from any one day, we have about 100 to 200 triages in there for outstanding client matters. So John's been booked in, he'll be in Triage, and we're going to click on the service ID, which will bring up what I'll call just a blank file or a blank service, okay? So nothing's been done to this, just pretty much records that John's been booked in for an appointment. You'll see the only information is that information that's taken at the time of booking. So his name, it has the additional parties and things like that. But you'll see it hasn't got any of John's personal details there. Okay, so what we'll do first is when we're talking to John, we'll fill out a client intake form for him and we'll upload that to his client file. You'll see there I'm going into the client file, into documents, and here's one I prepared earlier. And that intake form goes on John's client file and you can access it at any time just by hitting that button there, the download button, and open it up and have a look at it. I haven't bothered to fill that one out, obviously. And once you've got the intake form, you can get out of his client file and you can head back to the actual service file, which is the triage that we initially had. And what we'll do is we'll head over to the Actions tab. Okay, so the Actions tab is a highly customizable utility where you can make notes, you can set reminders, you can set bring-ups, you can set court dates. All those things that I discussed can be done by the Action tab. So what we'll do is we'll click on New Action. And the action we're doing here is a file note. And you can see there's a whole bunch of actions there. It probably looks different to yours because we've custom created most of our actions to suit what work we regularly do and how we want to record things. There are some from the class developer still in there. But we have created our own, which is very easy to do. So we'll select file note for this demonstration. We'll select by telephone because we're speaking to John by phone. And once we're talking to John, you can take your contemporaneous file note during your appointment, or if he's sitting in the office, you can take notes during your meeting with him as well. And there's my incredibly detailed contemporaneous file note. And you'll see it records on the right-hand side there, it records the time it was created. So it will always record what time you created it. And it will record who it's assigned to, so who wrote it, okay? We'll tick complete because we've finished talking to John now and we've taken our note. And we can just click Save and Close. And there's your file note for your service, okay? Now it shows the time and date of creation. If you head across to service audit, it shows an even more detailed sort of which user created it or edited it and things like that, which can be important. Obviously, you don't want to be backdating file notes and things like that, but the service audit will always show the actual time that it was created, so there's no cheating that. All right, and then we're going to go back into a new action type again. And what we'll do is we'll record a limitation period. So I spoke earlier that we mark our limitation period separately so it's clearly identifiable for risk management purposes. So we've told John he has a limitation period. I think it was a court date on the 16th of July. And we've told him to attend and he's told us he will attend. So we'll save that limitation period. So on his service, you've got a file note and you've got a limitation period now. Now, once you've got those details, you're sort of looking at finalising the service. So it's still a triage. Let's get it across to an advice. So it becomes an advice. But first, we want to upload any client documents as well, which can be saved to a service. So here's another one I prepared earlier. That's his infringement notice that we'll upload to that service. So you've got your file note, your limitation period, and your documents, okay? So now we need to get it from a triage to an actual advice service or a legal advice, okay? So what we do here is we generally have one or two positions who do the data entry in the office, okay? But it could easily be done by a caseworker as well. But what we'll do for the purpose of this demonstration is we can actually send an email to the person responsible for data entry telling them this triage is ready for data entry and it needs to be entered as a legal advice. Okay, so you see I've selected data entry by telephone because that was the type of appointment. Legal advice will send a calendar file which will prompt the email. And what I'll do there is I'll select Cheryl because she's our administration officer who does the data entry. And I'll click save and close. Eventually. And then what that will actually do once you've saved and closed it, that will send an email notification that says data entry to Cheryl, and then Cheryl can go into the service and she will convert it from a triage to a legal advice. Now, once it is converted to a legal advice, all of your actions carry across, so your file note, your limitation period, all of your documents carry across as well. So there won't be any change. It will just cease to become a triage and it will now be a legal advice that you can search for, and John will become a full client. Now, what I'm showing you here is when Cheryl enters it as a legal advice, she'll actually send another action to the principal lawyer or the responsible person saying, a legal advice has been entered, it's ready for checking. Okay, and then the responsible person will check, obviously, that the advice given was accurate. The responsible person can send any notes to the caseworker by class. They can send notes back to them saying, hey, this needs to be fixed, or hey, this limitation period's wrong, you need to make a call. All of that can be done by class, and it records it all in class in chronological order so you can easily see what's happening on the service. But if they're happy with it, generally they just tick the complete box, which I'll do in a moment, and save and close. And again, the service audit will then show when the responsible person has checked it and at what time they did that. Okay. That's just the service audit, which you can see there. But there, so that's a basic legal advice file. You got your file note, limitation period, and your documents uploaded. And once that's entered, it will become a legal advice and change from a triage. Okay. So that's all I had for that example. I'm hoping that makes sense to people, or people can generally see what we're doing. Okay. I'm just showing you here is that when Cheryl enters it as an advice, she'll get the rest of the details she needs from for John's client file from that intake sheet that we filled out and uploaded. Okay, so what we'll look at now then is something it's a little more complicated, but it's a representation service, but it will show us even more what class can do for you. So the situation here is that John's given us some basic advice a few weeks ago. He calls us up a few days before his plea or appearance in court, and he's saying, oh, look, I need to be represented. I can't represent myself. And you agree because of the kind-hearted lawyer you are, that last minute you will rush up to court and assist John. Okay, so I'll just click play again. These videos go a lot quicker the second time this second one does. So if John's not a current client, if he's contacted us again and there's no open service, he'll still be triaged again, or he'll still need to be triaged. So what I'll do here, you'll see, is I'll just triage John so he goes into that parking lot before we open up a representation service. As I said, a caseworker could just make the service themselves, but we just had some concerns about consistency of data and everything being done correctly that we haven't ironed out yet. But that's certainly one way to do it. You see, I've noted there he's an existing client, so that when Cheryl or whoever creates the service, that the service can just be merged with John's existing client file. So I'll just fill in the absolute basic details that you need to set up the triage. I won't do a complex search, although obviously you should be doing a complex search when you're triaging things, only because I don't want 2,000 other Johns to come up if we searched his name. Okay, so I'm just going to click Save Service. All right, and then you'll see I'm in the Triage tab. I'm just going to refresh it there. So that's John's new triage that we've just created. So we're going to click on that, and we're going to head back to Triage, and we're going to head over to that Actions tab, which is our highly customizable tab where we can record things. And this is just an example, but we might put, let's say John's called me, I might put a file note in. You know, John's called me, wants me to represent him on this date. I've said I would. We need to do X, Y, Z or whatever, and record that as a file note. And we'll mark out the limitation period as it needs to be marked on every new service type. So we're going to mark that separately again for our risk management purposes. We might want to upload some documents. So we're now representing John in a plea. So we might have some more documents to upload, like our plea notes or submissions to pros or anything like that. So we're going to upload some more documents, and there's some that I prepared earlier. Okay. And then once we've sort of done that initial information that we put on the service, we want it to get changed to a court and tribunal. So we'll send another data entry request. We'll send another email off, which will go to our administration worker to get it changed to a court and tribunal. Now, we use templates that set out what information you need to give someone for data entry. Okay, obviously a court and tribunal, you need more information than a legal advice. So you can see I've gone into our guide here and I've just copied across the relevant information that we would need to give the administration worker to create a court and tribunal. I'll just copy that across and delete it as necessary. And we'll send calendar file and we'll select Cheryl again. All right, so then the data will go to Cheryl, and then that will change over to a court and tribunal, and everything from Triage will carry across. Even if you're doing it to your new court and tribunal service. Sorry, and you'll see here I'm just setting a reminder. Something I forgot to mention before I moved on. So I'm setting a reminder for myself because I've got a court date now that I need to go up to court with John, and obviously we want to diarise that straight away. So we'll put a reminder that I'm appearing in court for John at a certain time. And we'll send a calendar file to myself. Once I finish that, we'll send a calendar file to myself. That'll shoot off an email to my Outlook with that reminder that I can save to my calendar. So then when I come into work on that day, I can see I've got a reminder I've got to go up to court in 10 minutes and represent John in his hearing. Okay, and as I said, all of that will carry across to the court tribunal once it's converted from a triage. All right, and I've just got one short video before we sort of move on to our questions. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at it when it's entered as a court tribunal service. Okay, so we'll open up class. You'll see all of John's information has now been put, because it's been merged with his existing client file, all of his information's updated. All of our notes have carried across from our actions tab, and all of our documents have carried across from our documents tab, okay? So we've gone up to court with John and our laptop or our iPad or our Surface Pro or whatever, and we want to create a new action to record that attendance. Now, there is one called court attendance that I think the class developers created, but it doesn't actually capture all the relevant courts we need. So we would just record it as a file note here, as you normally would a file note in court when you're appearing in front of a magistrate. So we'll type our notes and we'll just click save and close. That's going to record the note. It's going to record who was at court. It's going to record who typed up the note as well. Now we come back to the office and we want to finalise the service. So we've appeared with John in court. He's got his outcome. He's happy with it. So we come back to the office and we want to close that court tribunal service. So what we do is we'll best practice, of course, we'll send John a closed file and an outcome letter. Okay, so I've already prepared that. I've emailed that out to John and I'm going to upload it to his service. Okay. And then we need to finalise the service so it ceases to become an open court tribunal service and will become a closed court tribunal service. So what we simply do there at Townsville Community Law is we just send another data entry request with that information of how the service needs to change. So we've got another template for closed service because it requires a little bit more information. Okay, so we've just got our hours spent, our characteristics. I've put, I think, test case, not that this would be a particular test case for a plea. And we list our court and tribunal dates so that can all be entered into John's service and his file. So once that's done, that would go to our administration worker who would update the data so that she would close that file. So as you can see, everything you would normally do on a paper file can be done easily in a servicing class, okay? And it can be saved on the service record in class. Once that file's closed, if you need to go and look at it again, it's a simple matter of searching for John's name, going to his client file, and you can see all the services in chronological order that we've entered, and we'll see that court tribunal one, all of our actions, all of our notes, all of our documents, they'll be there. They don't change even though the service has been closed, okay? And once a court tribunal or a representation service is closed, again, a notification will get sent by our administration worker to the responsible person to say our file's been closed, it's ready for checking. Okay, so that concludes the demonstrations. Just a few closing remarks. I suppose based on our experience, I think be prepared to invest in time, tech and training. It can sound, I mean, particularly daunting, but our experience has, in terms of the productivity and the flexibility aspect of it, it has been more than worth it. Don't be afraid to take risks or fail. I'm not talking about like in your legal work. I'm talking about in terms of how you might be using class, or you want to try something different on class. For any one finished or refined process or template, there were at least 10 before it that we have built on or improved on over time. Be agile and so be prepared to change and be receptive and encourage feedback from your staff members, because really they're the people who are using it on a daily basis, so they're going to have the best idea about what's working and what's not working for them. So encourage that feedback and work with your staff to come up with the best processes possible. Be prepared for a cultural change. It is a huge shift, and it's very, very important to make sure your staff feel comfortable and supported when they're moving in that direction, okay? And do what works for your centre. We all work a little differently. For example, the example I gave earlier was that traditionally at our centre there's been 1 or 2 roles that would coordinate all of the data entry, so opening and closing services for our centre. Our system's been built around that. That's why we send the data entry through class to someone else, okay? But there's nothing stopping, if you are completely comfortable with your staff members entering that themselves, then there's nothing stopping your staff members from doing that themselves. That process we're sort of looking at simplifying at the moment to try and make things a bit more straightforward. Okay, so just before questions, Sam, if we could do the closing poll, would you feel more comfortable using class as a practice management software after this webinar? Oh, look at that. Wonderful. I told Sam earlier in the week it would be her fault if everyone said no. So no, that's fantastic. All right. Well, have we got any questions for me or evaluation? My contact details are there. If anyone doesn't feel comfortable contacting me through the webinar, feel free to send me an email or give me a buzz.
Thanks so much for that, Michael. That was awesome. And thank you to everybody who answered yes. It means it's not my fault. That's great. We've got lots of questions that have come through. So I'll just go through and pick a couple of them. I know that we've got a little bit over time, but there's lots of questions, which is great. Jess said, I wasn't aware that you could set reminders. Can you show us how to do this?
I can't show you my live screen because it's full of confidential information. So I sort of showed it. Yeah, whoever asked that, it might be better if you could maybe it's relatively simple. You basically just need to create an action, a custom action in class called reminder or court date or whatever you want to call it or whatever you're going to use reminders for. And then through that actions tab, you basically select the action you've created, you type in your reminder and you send a calendar file to yourself. It might be creating the actual actions that are more difficult. That's sort of one of those more difficult things I mentioned, but it's relatively straightforward if I could perhaps tee up with that person to have a chat at a later date and walk them through it if that's okay. Or I'd be happy to put together maybe even a little guide and email it to all the attendees if they want.
The rest on notice.
Thanks so much. Is there a limit of how much stuff can go into class? Our immigration files go for years and have a lot of country and other research.
I absolutely appreciate that. Look, when you upload documents to class, it does tell you that there is a limit for each individual upload, as in, like, don't upload something bigger than 20 megabytes. I still do, and it's never stopped me. Like, it doesn't actually stop you from doing that. I mean, in terms of some of our larger files, for example, that inquest file, which would traditionally take up about 3 suitcases, including, like, you know, the brief of evidence and then all your client interaction and thing like that, that is on class, and every single document I've ever gotten, that ran for, as in the matter ran for about 2 years. And that's all on class. And I've never experienced any sort of lagging. I haven't experienced reduction in speed. It all just seems to work fine. If there is a limit to how much you can store on a client service, I haven't hit it yet. But the help desk might be able to answer that. My thoughts are, because it's in the cloud, there is no limit.
Awesome, thank you. Diane says, how do you deal with volunteer solicitors and multiple students using class for recording advices? Do you have separate logins for them all? And did you do separate training for them?
Yep, so that was one of the milestones that we haven't reached yet. So our volunteers and our students are still paper-based at our clinics, but all of our students do have a separate, so our volunteer students that sort of work here during the day, they all have a separate login and an individual login for them, which is relatively easy to set up for them. So as I said that I was planning on moving our clinical program in semester 2 over to paperless or Paperlite. My thoughts are each student will have to have an individual login. So they'll log in and you can see that what they're doing on different services and things like that. And then the supervisor's obviously going to have to be recording some sort of check as well.
Excellent, thank you. Nikki says, we use class for recording communications and Microsoft SharePoint for files. I save emails, documents in SharePoint, and then put the link to the files in class. For example, I'll copy and paste the email into a class action description, save the email with attachments in SharePoint, copy the link to the file and put this link in the class action description so it's easy to open with the original email. I find this quicker and easier than saving emails with attachments in class. Is that what you do?
So no, it's not. As I said, you have to do what's right for you and for your service and your practice. We sort of came to the view that we only wanted to really store things in one place. We didn't want to have to be looking at SharePoint whatever, and a few other things. And this is certainly something we have considered, but we just sort of wanted to store things in one place. So in terms of what you're talking about, if a client emails me with 5 attachments, then I'll save the email and I'll save the 5 attachments, and then I'll upload that to class in the Documents tab. And then if I need to reply to that client, then obviously I'm going through my Outlook to do that. There is some capability to send external emails to clients from class. As I understand it, we were sort of halfway through figuring that out when we hit some issues, so I'm still waiting for the help desk to get back to me with that. But that's definitely a way to do it, and if that works for your service, that might be the best way to do it for you, Nikki.
Awesome, thanks, Michael. I've just got a couple more. We might go into about 1:15. For all of the questions that are associated with risk, I'll just let you know that CLCQ is doing a project on that at the moment. We can release a little bit more information as it kind of progresses a little bit, but I'll just go ahead to some more questions. You can also email either myself or Carly if you have any direct questions relating to risk, but at the moment, the next one, Michael, is what are general bring-ups?
That's just a reminder, sorry. We call them bring-ups for some reason. So an example is you write to another party. I'll set a bring up, depending on the urgency of the matter, I'll set a bring up 14 days to say, that will say, has other party responded? If not, call them or send them another letter. And then I'll put that as a reminder in class and then save it. And then that automatically saves it to my Outlook as well. So a bring up, I suppose, is just recording a time to bring up your file and look at it in case something else needs to be done. It's really just a reminder.
Perfect, thank you. Does class ensure the security of stored documents?
According to the help desk, yes. Yeah. Yeah, as far as we can tell, and I mean, our director, Aaron, is probably the best person to talk to about the security type of things, but as far as we can tell, our discussions with them, with NACLC or CLCA, as they're known now, was that we were satisfied that it was secure for us to use for our purposes.
And do you have any concerns with trusting class to maintain data integrity?
No. I mean, not really. As far as when we've implemented this, it's been fairly, apart from getting people used to it, fairly smooth sailing. We haven't had any issues with, like, all of our data has been there and all of it's been accurate, and any inaccuracies in that we're on the part of like a human element, but that's really minimal. So for example, because we send data entry to someone else, there might be, if that person's has gone away for a week or something, we need to ensure that data is getting entered so it's not backing up to like 300 data entry requests or something like that. So I think there's certainly human risks with it. Those risks probably do increase if you're getting your sort of day-to-day workers to do data entry themselves. So if I was doing data entry, which is why we've chosen to centralize it, but there is a human risk, certainly.
Sure. And Deidre's asked, why do the intake on a separate form rather than directly into class?
That's a great question. That's something we are looking at changing as well. I mean, we did it on a separate form initially because we've always used that intake form and it was easy. It does ask questions that don't appear in the class fields that we need. So things like file destruction consents or case study consents. And I think the last time we looked at changing it, there were a few indicators that it wasn't, that we wanted to gather that didn't appear in class. So I think that's the reason why we're still using it, but it's certainly something we're looking at changing to see if, we can set up an electronic tick of the box thing for case study consents and for like privacy policy and file destruction consents. That's a good question.
Awesome. Does class work with Google Calendar?
I have no idea. I expect it does. I mean, the reason class sends me emails when I when I tell it to, it's because it's registered to my email address, like on my Mac in front of me. I expect it would. I expect you'd be easily able to save like a calendar file to a Google Calendar as well. It's not something I've tested though. But generally everything sort of integrates with Android a bit easier than Macs anyhow. So I expect it would. Just give it a go.
Can you get a report printed for a client showing all the different actions for one client?
Yep. So you can. I can go back and show you really quickly. Where are we going to? Sorry. So we're in our Actions tab there. You'll see you've got an export button up there, so you can export it to a PDF or whatever. And you've got a download button, so you can download it as a PDF too. So you can actually, so let's say you've got a file that's got 50 actions on there. If you click download, it'll print out, it'll like generate a PDF document that has your 50 file notes, all the information you put in there, all your file notes, etc., the dates and the times and the person who took them into paper form or a PDF. So you can download them. That's actually what we do for court sometimes, is I'll just download them so I don't have to connect to class during the hearing.
All right, we've just got a couple of questions on conflict, Michael, if you don't mind. Thanks so much for taking a little bit of extra time. We really appreciate it. At what point in the process do you do conflict checking, and how do you manage conflicts and information barriers for staff in class?
Well, I mean, it's going to depend on the service. We don't generally have, we don't have too many information barriers here that we need to set up to prevent staff from accessing things. I haven't tried to do it, but I believe you can sort of quarantine certain matters in class so that a certain person couldn't access them. I believe that's possible, but I haven't tried to do it myself. In terms of conflicting, I mean, we'll conflict check. So as soon as someone calls up, as I understand it, they get triaged straight away, okay? Then they might tell us their story or tell us what they're seeking advice about. The conflict check is done at that first instance, so it's doing it before it even gets to me. They'll be conflict checked. If it is a conflict, then their triage might be changed, and they've been referred. Their triage might be changed to a referral or an information or whatever, and the conflict notes get put then on that informational referral service. So if the person rings back in 2 months' time, we can search their name and it'll come up and it'll say, hey, we've already told this person, we've referred them because we can't assist them. So we do it at that first instance, like I'm sure most people do, and you can record it all electronically through class. I think the section of the guide on conflict checking from memory is overly onerous and probably not a good one to implement. It was sort of like the first thought we had, but when I actually sit down and try and refine it, I'm sure there's a much more straightforward way to record it.
Perfect, thank you. We've got another really good one from Giselle. She says, did you consider any other electronic client management systems? And if so, why did you end up choosing Class? And just for everybody's information, we will be having a presentation from Action Step in a couple of weeks. But at this stage, Michael, why did you end up choosing Class?
Cost. So we did make some inquiries. We sort of realised the way we wanted to set it up, we'd need to pay for a separate license for each person who wanted to use it. I mean, there's all sorts of problems with sharing licenses anyhow. And you're looking at, I can't remember the exact cost, but maybe a couple of grand or $5,000 per year per license for 10 people adds up. That might not be the license cost. That was just sort of a number I threw out there. But primarily it was the cost. Class was already provided to us through CLCA. And my experience, my personal experience, Giselle, is using other systems like Leap or whatever. Realistically, Class isn't, it's a little bit more clunky, but it's not, I think it's on par with them for our purposes.
Excellent, thank you. Aaron's also really helpfully answering some of these, and I will configure a way to get all this information out in a helpful way and we can circulate it. He said that Community Legal Centres Australia has undertaken a great deal of work on security, and It's a highly secure Australian-based server farm, which is great to know. And Jack has said you can add file destruction and privacy notice to the intake process if you wanted to do it in class. And he's happy for people to get in touch. We've got one from Claire here that says, how can you get this information off class should you need to, i.e. if you no longer want to use class or client request file, etc.?
Well, you can download it, like I just showed you in the Actions tab. So you can download all of your actions, you can download all of your documents. If you, for some reason, no longer wanted to use class, you can export them to PDFs, and if you're going back to paper, print them or chuck them on another practice management software, I guess. Does that answer the question?
That's great, thank you. And I might do one more. There's lots of really good questions, but unfortunately we don't have time for all of them. So this one's from Coleman. It says,
yeah, anyone can send me an email after this as well. I'll put my details back up.
Thank you so much. Is converting a triage to a court or tribunal service as simple as making the new service and then merging it into the client? They don't currently use triage.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure can. So is converting a triage into a court or tribunal service as simple as making the new service and then merging it into the client?
Yep. Yeah, so we sort of put everything in triage. That's our parking lot, and we found that's worked really well. So, like, for instance, John Doe's matter, we made a triage for him. When that goes to be converted, you just select service type, you change court and tribunal. You'll be asked to put in a bit more information than I might have put in the triage, which is why I gave that extra information in the data entry request. And then at some stage throughout that process, it will ask, is this an existing client or a new client? And if it's an existing client, you can merge it with John's existing client file. Or if it's a new client, you can create a new client. It is as simple as sort of a couple of steps, a couple of clicks.
Perfect, thank you. Now there's still lots of questions coming through, so we might see if we can maybe circulate these or just grab some answers off you later on, Michael, and then make sure that everybody has access to that information. But at this stage, we'd just like to say thank you so much. That was really, really informative. There's been lots of engagement from everybody on the line, so we'd like to say thank you again. Thank you for tuning in. And
all good. Thank you very much, everyone.
We will talk to you soon.
All right, thank you.
Everybody.